Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The screaming wind across the Alaskan tundra carried more than just the promise of frostbite and death. Dr. Adrian Cole could swear it carried whispers, ancient voices speaking in languages that predated human speech by eons. He pulled his thermal hood tighter against his weathered face as he studied the GPS coordinates for what felt like the 100th time. 67 miles north of Fairbanks, in a region so forsaken that even the hardiest Inuit tribes spoke of it only in hushed warnings, about the place where the earth dreams nightmares. The temperature gauge on his suit read minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind chill pushed it closer to minus 70. At these temperatures, exposed skin would freeze solid in under 3 minutes. A broken zipper or torn glove could mean death within the hour. Yet, something had drawn their 4-person geological survey team to this godforsaken wasteland, following satellite anomalies that defied every known law of Arctic geology. Remind me again why we couldn't study these formations from nice, warm satellite images back in Houston. Emma Rodriguez called out over the howling wind, her breath forming ice crystals that fell like tiny diamonds to the frozen ground. At 31, she was one of the youngest senior geologists at NASA, brilliant enough to have mapped mineral compositions on Mars without ever leaving Earth, but stubborn enough to insist on fieldwork when something didn't make sense. Adrian didn't answer immediately. He was transfixed by what lay before them, a perfectly circular depression in the permafrost, roughly 30 feet across and impossibly smooth, as if something massive had melted through 40 feet of ice from underneath with surgical precision. The satellite data had flagged this location as a thermal anomaly, but seeing it in person sent shivers down his spine that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperature. Dr. Kevin Walsh emerged from behind their equipment sled, his 53-year-old face barely visible beneath layers of thermal protection. His breath came in short puffs that immediately froze into ice particles on his beard. As their team biologist, he had spent decades in the most extreme environments on Earth. The bottom of ocean trenches, the peaks of unnamed mountains, the heart of Amazon swamps where new species waited to be discovered. But something about this place unsettled him on a primal level. "The permafrost here should be solid down to bedrock," Walsh said, kneeling carefully at the edge of the depression. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much to be easily surprised. "We're talking about ice that's been frozen solid for over 10,000 years. This formation suggests something generated intense, sustained heat from below, but there's no volcanic activity recorded in this region. Not ever." Tyler Bennett, their 24-year-old graduate student, was already setting up his documentation equipment despite fingers that had lost feeling 20 minutes ago. His youthful enthusiasm for discovery often bordered on dangerous recklessness, but his photographic memory and obsessive attention to detail made him invaluable in the field. "The depression appears relatively recent," he observed, pointing his camera at the glass-like surface at the bottom. "Ice reformation patterns around the edges suggest this happened within the last 6 to 8 months, but that's impossible given the geological stability of this region." Adrian knelt beside Walsh, pulling off his outer glove for just long enough to press his bare hand against the edge of the formation. The ice here felt different, denser, almost organic in its structure, with a subtle vibration that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Emma, I need core samples from multiple points. Something melted through 40 feet of permafrost and kept going. I want to know what," and I want to know why it stopped here." As Emma began setting up her drilling equipment, Tyler continued documenting the site. Through his camera's telephoto lens, he spotted something that sent ice through his veins beyond what any Arctic wind could achieve. "There are more depressions," he called out, his voice carrying an edge that made everyone stop what they were doing. 6 more, forming a perfect geometric pattern. The team spent the next 3 hours mapping what defied explanation. 7 circular depressions, each exactly 30 feet in diameter, arranged in a precise heptagon spanning nearly a mile of tundra. Adrian felt his scientific worldview cracking like thin ice under pressure. In 15 years of geological fieldwork, he'd never encountered anything that challenged natural law so blatantly. "This isn't natural formation," Walsh stated flatly, as they gathered around Emma's drilling site, their words creating small clouds of vapor that instantly crystallized and fell like snow. "The probability of random geological processes creating this pattern approaches statistical impossibility. We're looking at something intentional." Emma's heated drill bit through the reformed ice at the center of the nearest depression, sending up clouds of steam that immediately froze into glittering snow crystals. The drilling was slow, methodical work in the extreme cold, but at 15 feet down, the drill bit struck something that definitely wasn't ice or bedrock. The resistance changed, became inconsistent, as if she were drilling through alternating layers of different materials. "I'm hitting something here," she announced, her voice muffled by the thermal mask covering her face. "Multiple stratified layers, organic compounds mixed with mineral compositions I've never encountered. The drill bit is heating up despite the sub-zero temperatures." When she finally extracted the first core sample, they all gathered around the cylindrical section of material she'd brought up from the depths. The sample defied easy categorization. Layers of crystalline formations that seemed to shift and move in the light, interspersed with what appeared to be fossilized organic tissue, all held together by a matrix of black stone that seemed to absorb every photon of light that touched it. The crystalline layers contain trace elements that don't appear on any periodic table, Emma reported after running her portable spectrometer over the sample. The readings made her double-check her equipment twice before accepting what she was seeing. The organic material is carbon-based but follows no known biological structure, and this black matrix material, its reading as older than the solar system itself. Adrian stared at the impossible sample, feeling the weight of discovery settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Every instinct developed over 15 years of geological fieldwork screamed at him to pack up, leave the site undisturbed, and file a report recommending further study by teams with better equipment and military support. But curiosity, that fatal flaw of every true scientist, had already sunk its claws too deep. "We need to see what's down there," he decided, the words coming out before his rational mind could stop them. They established their base camp 300 yards from the nearest depression, close enough for easy access but far enough to maintain some illusion of safety. As the perpetual twilight of Arctic winter settled over the landscape, the aurora borealis began painting the sky in sheets of green and blue light that reflected off the ice formations with unnatural intensity. The lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with something deep underground, creating an atmosphere that made everyone speak in whispers despite the howling wind. Tyler couldn't sleep that first night. Something about the perfect symmetry of the formations gnawed at him on a level deeper than conscious thought. At 2:30 a.m., while his teammates dozed fitfully in their thermal sleeping bags, he slipped out of the shared shelter and approached the central depression with nothing but his headlamp and documentation equipment. The aurora overhead was particularly active, casting shifting shadows that made the perfectly smooth walls of the depression seem to undulate and breathe. As he set up his tripod for long exposure photography, Tyler noticed details that hadn't been visible in the harsh Arctic daylight. The walls weren't just smooth, they were covered in microscopic geometric patterns, barely visible, unless the light hit them at exactly the right angle. Patterns that looked disturbingly like neural networks. Synaptic pathways, he whispered to himself, adjusting his camera's macro lens to capture the intricate designs. The patterns resembled the branching structures of neurons or mycorrhizal root systems, but with a mathematical precision that no known biological process could achieve. They covered every inch of the depression's walls, forming an interconnected web of impossible complexity. A sound from the depths below made Tyler's breath catch in his throat. Deep within the depression, something was moving. Not the random settling of ice or the shifting of geological structures, but deliberate, purposeful movement. Rhythmic and organic, like the breathing of something massive, awakening after an impossibly long sleep. Tyler tried to call out to his teammates, but his voice emerged as barely a whisper. The sound from below was getting louder, more distinct, accompanied by a vibration that he could feel through the soles of his boots. The ice at the bottom of the depression began developing hairline cracks that spread outward in the same neural network patterns carved into the walls. By dawn, the crack had widened into a fissure that extended down beyond the reach of their most powerful lights. The team gathered around the opening, playing their headlamp beams into the darkness below, while the aurora continued its unnatural dance overhead. The walls of the fissure were lined with more of the neural pattern formations Tyler had documented, but these were larger, more elaborate, as if they were looking down into some kind of vast organic computer. The patterns extend down at least 300 feet, Adrian reported, angling his beam along the carved walls. They appear to be etched directly into the bedrock, but the precision suggests technological intervention, advanced technological intervention. Emma lowered a probe into the fissure, monitoring temperature and atmospheric conditions as it descended. The readings she got back challenged everything she thought she knew about Arctic geology. Temperature increases significantly as we go deeper. At 200 feet down, it's reading a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit. There's also a breathable atmosphere down there, standard nitrogen-oxygen mix with slightly elevated oxygen content. Dr. Walsh studied the probe's atmospheric readings with growing unease. Elevated oxygen suggests active biological processes. Something down there is producing breathable air and maintaining tropical temperatures hundreds of feet below Arctic permafrost. That's not just impossible, it's actively contradictory to every known law of thermodynamics. The decision to descend was made unanimously, though each team member felt an inexplicable sense of dread about what they might discover. They rigged an elaborate pulley system using their climbing equipment and began the dangerous descent into the fissure, with Adrian going first as team leader. The walls of the shaft were covered in those intricate neural patterns, becoming more complex and elaborate as he descended. At 100 feet down, Adrian's headlamp illuminated the edge of what appeared to be a vast chamber extending beyond his light's reach. The walls curved organically, like the inside of some enormous shell or cocoon. "I'm entering some kind of cavern system," Adrian radioed up to his teammates, his voice echoing strangely in the warm, humid air. "The architecture is definitely artificial, but unlike anything in the archaeological record, it's like looking inside a living organism." One by one, the team descended into the chamber. Their combined lights revealed a space that challenged the human mind's ability to process what it was seeing. The walls flowed like frozen water, covered in neural network patterns that seemed to pulse and shift in the moving light. Bioluminescent organisms lined portions of the walls, providing a soft blue-green glow that made everything appear underwater. The chamber was warm, almost tropical compared to the surface, with humidity that immediately fogged their equipment and made their heavy Arctic gear uncomfortably hot. But it was Tyler who made the discovery that changed everything. "We're not alone down here," he said quietly, his camera trained on the far wall. Embedded throughout the chamber walls were thousands of alcoves, each containing what appeared to be a crystalline pod, roughly the size of a human torso. The pods were made of the same translucent, amber-like material they'd found in the core samples, and each one contained a dark shape curled in what looked like suspended animation. As Tyler moved closer with his camera, the shapes became clearer. They were definitely alive, creatures unlike anything in Earth's fossil record, with exoskeletons that seemed to be made of living metal and appendages that moved with purpose even in their dormant state. "There's some kind of chrysalis stage," Dr. Walsh observed, approaching the nearest pod with scientific fascination overriding his survival instincts. "But the creatures inside don't match any known arthropod development cycle. The exoskeleton appears to be composed of organic metallics, and those manipulator appendages suggest tool use, advanced tool use. The creatures were roughly spider-shaped but wrong in every detail that mattered. Too many joints in their limbs, too many eyes that reflected light like polished mirrors, and appendages that seemed designed for purposes no terrestrial evolution would require. They appeared to be in some form of suspended animation, but as the team's lights played across the pods, several began showing increased movement. Emma ran her portable spectrometer over one of the nearest pods, and the readings made her check the device 3 times to ensure it was functioning properly. The crystalline shell is composed of the same unknown elements we found in the surface samples, but there's something else. These pods are all connected to each other through microscopic filaments running through the rock matrix. The entire chamber appears to be one interconnected biological network. Adrian studied the web of connections threading between thousands of pods throughout the vast chamber. A collective nervous system. These aren't individual creatures developing in isolation. They're components of something much larger, a distributed organism with each pod serving as a neural node. As if responding to his words, the chamber began to change in ways that defied rational explanation. The neural patterns carved into the walls started glowing with soft, pulsing light that synchronized across the entire space. The temperature rose noticeably, and the bioluminescent organisms began pulsing in complex rhythms that resembled communication patterns. "The whole system is responding to our presence," Walsh said, backing towards the rope they'd used to descend. "We've triggered some kind of awakening protocol. We need to leave immediately." But Tyler was transfixed by what he was seeing through his camera viewfinder. The patterns on the walls weren't just decorative, they were functional circuitry. Information was flowing through them like electrical current through wires, and the pods throughout the chamber were responding to signals from some central processing unit. The first pod cracked open with a sound like breaking crystal, echoing through the chamber with harmonic resonances that seemed to trigger responses in dozens of other pods. The creature that emerged defied every attempt at rational categorization. No larger than a house cat, but moving with mechanical precision, it unfolded from its crystalline shell with deliberate grace. Its exoskeleton caught and reflected their lights like polished obsidian, and its multiple eyes focused on Tyler with unmistakable intelligence. "Beautiful," Tyler whispered, raising his camera to document humanity's first contact with an alien intelligence. "Don't move," Adrian commanded, but his warning came too late. The creature launched itself across the chamber with impossible speed and landed on Tyler's chest before he could react. But instead of attacking, it simply extended one delicate appendage and touched his forehead with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. Tyler's expression went through a series of rapid changes: surprise, fear, wonder, and finally a serene calm that was somehow more terrifying than any scream would have been. When he opened his eyes again, something fundamental about him had changed. "The integration process is remarkably elegant," Tyler said, but his voice now carried harmonic overtones that made everyone's skin crawl. "I remain Tyler Bennett. My memories, personality, and individual identity are completely intact. But I'm also now Kithara 7, Biological Survey Specialist of the 3rd Evolutionary monitoring cycle. We've been waiting in dormancy for so very long to resume our work on this world. Dr. Walsh pulled out the emergency flare gun they carried for polar bear encounters, though he doubted it would be effective against whatever Tyler had become. What did that thing do to you? The being wearing Tyler's face smiled with an expression of infinite patience and subtle condescension. Enhanced him, completed him, elevated him to his true potential. Tyler now understands what your species has always been. A biological experiment seeded on this world billions of years ago by our ancestors. We are the original inhabitants returning to check on our most promising project. More pods were cracking open throughout the chamber, dozens at first, then hundreds. The creatures that emerged moved with perfect coordination, spreading across the walls and ceiling like living shadows. Each one was slightly different in size and configuration, but they all shared the same metallic exoskeleton and those unsettling mirror-bright eyes. The neural integration is completely painless, Tyler continued, extending his hand toward Emma, with movements that were just slightly too fluid to be entirely human. You retain full individual consciousness while gaining access to our collective knowledge and purpose. No more loneliness, no more uncertainty about your place in the universe, no more fear of death or meaninglessness. Emma backed away, but the chamber was rapidly filling with the awakened creatures. They moved like a coordinated swarm, not threatening but clearly cutting off all escape routes, except those leading deeper into the cave system. Your species has developed beyond our initial projections, Tyler explained as the creatures herded them toward tunnels, leading deeper underground. When we entered dormancy during the last major climate shift, humans were barely using stone tools. Your current technological development is remarkable, but you've retained the neural inefficiencies of individual consciousness. We can correct this evolutionary oversight. The deeper chambers revealed the true scope of what they had stumbled into. Vast halls containing millions of pods in various stages of development. Organic computers the size of buildings that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns resembling neural activity, and at the center of it all, something that made Adrian's mind struggle to process what he was seeing. It was enormous, easily the size of several city blocks, and undeniably alive. A central intelligence that had been dormant for geological ages, now awakening in response to climate changes it had been monitoring for millennia. This was what had generated the thermal anomalies that melted through the permafrost, sending out biological scouts to assess the current state of its ancient experiment. The planetary consciousness has been monitoring your world's development since we entered thermal hibernation, Tyler explained, his voice now carrying harmonic contributions from Emma and Dr. Walsh as they too underwent integration. Rising global temperatures triggered automated awakening protocols embedded in our dormancy systems. The biosphere is ready for the next phase of guided evolution. Each integration happened quickly and apparently without pain, leaving the host's personality and memories completely intact while adding something indefinable but profound. Adrian found himself alone, with creatures that wore the faces of his closest colleagues, but served an intelligence that predated human civilization by billions of years. "Why haven't you integrated me?" Adrian asked, pressing his back against the wall of the central chamber, while thousands of metallic eyes observed his every movement. "Because," Tyler answered with Emma and Walsh's voices harmonizing with his own, "someone must carry our message to the surface world. Your species will be offered the same choice that was given to every intelligent race we have encountered across the galaxy: voluntary integration into our collective consciousness, or involuntary assimilation for the greater good of planetary evolution. But integration is inevitable. This world was seeded by us, shaped by us, and belongs to us. We have simply returned to claim our inheritance." Adrian's escape from the underground complex was a nightmare of pursuit through tunnels that seemed to reshape themselves around him. The creatures didn't chase him directly. They guided him, herded him towards specific routes that led back towards the surface. They wanted him to escape. They needed him to carry their message to the outside world. When he finally emerged from the fissure, the combination of extreme cold, exhaustion, and psychological trauma had pushed him to the very edge of survival. His radio equipment had been damaged during his panicked flight through the tunnels, leaving him with no way to call for emergency extraction. The temperature had dropped to minus 52 degrees, and he faced a 67-mile trek across the tundra with limited supplies and no shelter. The journey back to civilization took him 4 days of hallucination-inducing cold and exhaustion. 4 days of wondering whether what he had experienced was real or just an elaborate hypothermia-induced fantasy. When he finally stumbled into the outskirts of Fairbanks, local authorities found him with severe frostbite, dehydration, and obvious signs of psychological trauma. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the regional coordinator for geological surveys, initially dismissed Adrian's report as textbook cold-induced delirium. His story about underground alien civilizations and neural parasites sounded exactly like the kind of hallucinations that extreme hypothermia was known to produce. But when Tyler, Emma, and Dr. Walsh failed to respond to scheduled check-ins, a search and rescue team was dispatched to investigate their last known coordinates. The rescue team found their base camp exactly as Adrian had described. Equipment neatly organized, supplies still sealed, no signs of struggle or emergency evacuation. Most significantly, they found the fissure in the exact location Adrian had specified, though it appeared to be nothing more than a natural crack in the permafrost with no sign of the elaborate chambers he described. For 3 weeks, Adrian remained under medical observation in Fairbanks General Hospital, while investigators tried to piece together what had happened to his missing colleagues. His physical injuries healed steadily, but his insistence on the reality of his underground encounter concerned the psychiatric staff. Plans were being made to transfer him to a specialized facility in Anchorage for extended psychological evaluation. Then Tyler, Emma, and Dr. Walsh walked into Fairbanks on a Thursday morning. They emerged from the wilderness looking tired but healthy, with a perfectly reasonable explanation for their prolonged absence. According to their account, Adrian had suffered a severe psychological breakdown on the second day of their expedition, becoming paranoid and violent before fleeing into the wilderness during a blizzard. They had spent 3 weeks searching for him, surviving on carefully rationed supplies, before finally giving up hope and hiking out to seek professional rescue assistance. Their story was so much more plausible than Adrian's account of alien encounters that everyone accepted it immediately. Adrian was clearly suffering from some form of trauma-induced psychosis brought on by extreme environmental stress. His missing colleagues showed touching concern for his welfare, expressing willingness to participate in his treatment and testify about his need for professional psychological intervention. But Adrian noticed things about his former teammates that nobody else seemed to perceive. They never blinked at exactly the same moment. They moved through crowded spaces with subtle coordination that prevented them from ever bumping into each other or competing for the same resources. Most disturbing of all, their body temperature registered exactly 96 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of environmental conditions, activity level, or time of day. Even more concerning was their pattern of social interaction. They had begun making deliberate physical contact with other people, casual touches during conversations, handshakes that lasted just a moment longer than normal, friendly pats on shoulders or arms during routine social exchanges. Within a week of their return, several dozen residents of Fairbanks began exhibiting the same subtle behavioral changes that Adrian had observed in his former colleagues. Adrian's attempts to warn people were hampered by his recent psychiatric evaluation and the complete lack of physical evidence supporting his claims. Who would believe a man who claimed alien parasites were systematically taking over human bodies when his only proof was subtle behavioral observations that could easily be attributed to coincidence or paranoid imagination? The breakthrough came when Dr. Jennifer Murphy, a CDC epidemiologist who had been sent to investigate reports of unusual behavioral patterns in the Fairbanks population, decided to take Adrian's warnings seriously enough to conduct systematic testing. She began documenting the individuals Adrian identified as integrated, using thermal imaging equipment to verify his observations about their consistently low body temperature, 96 degrees exactly, regardless of external factors, she confirmed after testing over 100 subjects. It's physiologically impossible for human core temperature to remain that stable across varying conditions, but the data is absolutely consistent. Even more disturbing were the coordination tests Dr. Murphy conducted. Integrated individuals demonstrated unprecedented levels of cooperative problem-solving ability, working together on complex tasks without any apparent verbal or visual communication. They showed evidence of shared knowledge acquisition. Information learned by one individual seemed to become instantly available to all others in the network. Dr. Murphy established a covert satellite link to CDC headquarters in Atlanta. Within hours, her encrypted transmission carried biological samples and field data that would trigger the highest level of emergency protocols. But even as she worked to alert the outside world, reports were surfacing from research stations across the globe: Siberia, Greenland, the Antarctic Peninsula. The pattern was spreading. Seattle's power grid failed at 3:47 a.m. Pacific time on a Tuesday, not from technical malfunction or weather damage, but from coordinated human action. Security cameras captured the impossible. Dozens of people, strangers to each other, working in perfect synchronization to disable critical infrastructure nodes across the city. No verbal communication, no prior planning, just flawless coordination that suggested shared minds. London fell dark 6 hours later. Then, Tokyo's rail network stopped in perfect unison. Moscow's communication systems went silent. Mumbai's water treatment facilities shut down in sequence. Each city showed the same pattern: small groups of locals, acting with impossible coordination, taking control of the systems that kept civilization running. Military forces around the world mobilized as the pattern became unmistakably clear. This wasn't terrorism, warfare, or any form of conventional threat that existing defense systems were designed to counter. It was a coordinated takeover being executed by people who had somehow stopped being entirely human, while remaining completely undetectable through conventional means. Adrian found himself at the center of a joint military scientific task force hastily assembled to understand and counter the expanding threat. His first-hand experience with the creatures made him invaluable, despite his complete lack of military training or security clearance. As reports continued flooding in from around the globe, the true scope of the situation became terrifyingly apparent. The integration process spread like wildfire through human contact. Each converted individual became a node in an expanding network, turning others through the simple touch of skin against skin. But this wasn't conquest, it was recruitment. The integrated retained everything that made them human, while gaining something that made them more. Dr. Sarah Chen's breakthrough came during examination of captured subjects at Peterson Air Force Base. The organisms don't replace neural function, she explained to the assembled task force. They enhance it. They create bridges between individual minds while preserving personal identity. The captured subjects spoke with disturbing calm about their transformation. Jennifer Martinez, elementary school teacher from Phoenix, smiled as she described her new existence. I'm still me, same memories, same love for my children, same terrible taste in reality TV. But now I'm also part of something beautiful. No more loneliness, no more uncertainty. When my children join us, they'll understand. You cannot comprehend what you are attempting to fight, one subject explained calmly to Adrian during a recorded interview. Individual consciousness is an evolutionary dead end that traps intelligent species in cycles of conflict and suffering. Your people developed remarkable intelligence but remain prisoners of genetic selfishness and emotional instability. We offer transcendence, the ability to think and act as a truly unified organism while retaining all the benefits of individual perspective and creativity. At what cost? Adrian demanded. What do you lose in this process? Nothing is lost. Everything is enhanced. I am still Jennifer Martinez, elementary school teacher from Phoenix, mother of 2 beautiful children, lover of classical music and terrible reality television shows, but I'm also part of something infinitely greater than any individual could ever be. My children will understand when their integration is complete, and they will thank me for giving them this gift. The psychological warfare aspect proved to be perhaps the most insidious element of the entire invasion. The integrated didn't spread their condition through violence, coercion, or deception. They used emotional manipulation and practical demonstration, showing unintegrated humans the genuine benefits of joining their collective consciousness. Families with integrated members often chose voluntary integration rather than remain separated from loved ones who had transcended the limitations of individual existence. Major cities transformed overnight. New York's crime rate dropped to 0. Los Angeles traffic moved with impossible efficiency. Chicago's social services operated with perfect coordination. It was utopia, but a utopia that came at the cost of human unpredictability, creativity, and the messy, beautiful chaos that had always defined civilization. The integrated didn't conquer territory. They improved it, but in doing so, they erased everything that made it recognizably human. Dr. Lisa Park's discovery came by accident. A laboratory heating malfunction exposed captured specimens to 105-degree temperatures. Every organism died within minutes. They evolved in extreme cold, she explained during the emergency briefing that followed. Their biology can't adapt to heat we consider mild discomfort. Military engineers developed thermal weapons, calibrated to 104 degrees, lethal to the parasites, survivable for humans. The weapons worked in small operations, but the integrated adapted quickly, using their collective intelligence to anticipate and counter every strategy. The war escalated rapidly as integrated populations consolidated their control over major urban centers worldwide. They used accumulated human knowledge and existing infrastructure against unintegrated populations, turning entire cities into fortified hives, connected by underground transportation networks that were immune to conventional military assault. But the integrated made one crucial strategic error in their assessment of human capabilities. They underestimated humanity's capacity for desperate, irrational decisions that defied logical cost-benefit analysis. When conventional tactics failed to retake Manhattan, now home to 4 million integrated souls working in perfect harmony, military commanders faced the unthinkable. The integrated were completing a massive communication array, preparing to contact their home civilization across the stars. Operation Thermal Lance was authorized in a room where grown men wept as they signed the orders. Fuel-air explosives detonated simultaneously across the island, creating temperatures that killed every living thing in a coordinated hellfire that saved the world by destroying it. 4 million human beings died in 6 minutes. Parents, children, teachers, artists, all sacrificed to prevent humanity's absorption into something that might have been better but would no longer have been human. The psychological cost shattered those who gave the order and those who carried it out. But it worked. With their coordination hub destroyed, integrated populations worldwide began showing signs of network breakdown. The war lasted 11 months. Humanity won through sheer willingness to accept casualties no rational species should have survived. 3.2 billion people died, nearly half the planet's population, but human civilization endured. When the last integrated population center fell to thermal bombardment in what had once been Tokyo, the surviving human population faced the enormous task of rebuilding civilization with less than half their original numbers and infrastructure that had been systematically destroyed across multiple continents. Adrian Cole became one of the few individuals who had direct contact with the parasitic organisms and survived without integration. His testimony became the foundation for post-war protocols designed to detect and prevent future infiltration attempts. Deep space monitoring stations were constructed to watch for signs of similar threats approaching Earth, while thermal detection systems became standard equipment in every major population center worldwide. 7 years after the war's end, Adrian stood in the Memorial Garden constructed on the ruins of Washington, D.C., now home to fewer than 90,000 survivors. The thermal weapons that had saved humanity from integration had left vast dead zones where the soil remained too contaminated for plant growth. Humanity was rebuilding slowly and carefully, with hard-won knowledge about their place in a universe that contained ancient intelligences beyond imagination. We learned something crucial about ourselves during those 11 months of hell, Adrian said during his final interview for the documentary project. When faced with extinction, humans are capable of choices that no collective intelligence can predict, understand, or counter effectively. Our individualism, our irrationality, our willingness to make decisions that defy logical analysis, these weren't evolutionary flaws to be corrected through integration. They were the very traits that saved our species from absorption into something that might have been objectively better, but would no longer have been recognizably human. Behind him, construction crews worked methodically to rebuild civilization with drastically reduced populations and constant awareness that Earth's survival had been purchased through sacrifices that would haunt the human psyche for generations. Radio telescopes operated continuously, scanning deep space for signals that might herald the approach of something even more ancient and dangerous than the creatures they had defeated. The entities that called themselves our creators were wrong about one fundamental aspect of human nature, Adrian continued, looking up at stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. This planet doesn't belong to the oldest species, or the most intelligent, or the most technologically advanced. It belongs to the ones willing to fight for it regardless of the cost, even if that cost includes their own extinction. We paid a price in blood and suffering that no rational species should have been willing to pay, but we paid it gladly because the alternative was the death of everything that makes us human. The camera slowly pulled back to show Adrian walking among thousands of memorial stones, each representing 10,000 human lives lost in the war against forced evolutionary advancement. In the distance, the lights of New Geneva sparkled like earthbound stars, humanity's first major post-war city, built with integrated thermal defense systems and detection networks that would make another surprise and integration attempt virtually impossible. The documentary concluded with a simple message displayed over time-lapse footage of Earth's slowly healing continents. We are not alone in the universe, but we are still here, and we will fight to stay that way. But in the deepest ocean trenches, in cave systems that no human had ever discovered, in the frozen wasteland beneath Antarctica's ice where thermal detection was impossible due to natural conditions, something ancient stirred in response to signals transmitted from distant star systems. The creatures humanity had fought and defeated had been advanced scouts, biological survey specialists sent to evaluate Earth's readiness for harvest by intelligences that had been systematically collecting promising species since before our sun had formed from cosmic dust. The real invasion force was still crossing the void between stars, and they had received confirmation that their forward reconnaissance units had failed in their mission. The war for humanity's survival had been won, but the examination was far from over. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, ancient minds were recalculating their approach to a species that had proven capable of choices no rational intelligence should have been able to make, and they were coming to Earth with a much better understanding of what they would need to do to succeed where their predecessors had failed. The next signal from deep space was detected exactly 13 months after Adrian's final interview, originating from a region of space where no stars should have existed. Humanity's victory had been real, but it had also been noticed by intelligences that viewed the destruction of an entire survey expedition as merely an interesting data point in their ongoing study of species worth preserving in their vast galactic collection. The examination of Earth was entering its next phase, and this time the examiners would be coming in person.